What's up, everybody? This is Phil Rogacki.
And I'm Jared Abergina.
You're listening to Two Tree Guys Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Phil Rogacki here with another episode of 2TG, also known as Two Tree Guys. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of the show. Today, we're going to bring you a What's Your Story? What's Your Story? If this is the first time you guys are ever listening to the podcast, What's Your Story is we bring industry badasses in and we discuss their story, discovering, personal stories of tree care, exploring their journey into the industry, the mentors who guided them along the way. We also have some other different talks. We got our safety talks where we tackle crucial safety messages with real-life examples and emphasizing the importance of a safety-first kind of mindset in the tree care industry. We have our gear talks. We dive in depth in exploring different types of tree gear, comparing different products in the market and providing insights into their uses, advantages, and innovations that's out there. Bringing new products to you guys and telling you what works and what doesn't work. And then we have our training talk. We do a comprehensive training session where we share valuable insights to help you guys kind of refine your skills, your approach, and adapt maybe new techniques to use on a daily basis. And then lastly, we have our full length. If you guys are ever out in California, you want to be on the show, we drink some beer, we have some fun. Sometimes we order sushi, and we just talk about tree care and life and love and happiness and whatever comes to our mind, we speak on. But today in the studio, we got Phil Berwick from Ferguson, Missouri. Owner, operator, salesperson, does it all, top to bottom of his company, Living Tree Care. But Phil, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much for letting me chill with you and talk trees.
Yeah, we're going to talk trees, man. We're going to talk about the industry, talk about you, hear your story. Everybody in the industry has a special story, right?
Absolutely.
And the world's going to listen to it. And I'm telling everybody on the podcast, if you liked it, if you loved it, if you got something out of it, if you learned something, if you laughed, the fee. And that fee is to share it. So don't keep it to yourself. Our industry is about sharing and helping out. This is how our industry gets better. This is how our industry grows. Is you guys that are listening to that. So that's all we ask. That's how the show grows. That's how I can still do this everywhere I go, is because you guys sharing it. So the more you share, that's the fee. So pay it forward. All right. So let's dive in, Phil. Let's hear your story, my friend.
Well, I started as a young man climbing trees.
You're still a young man.
You know what? Every year someone calls me a young man.
Yes.
I'm 67.
Oh, good for you.
And I'm blessed to be able to still climb. Not as fast as I used to. It's like, how do I get from point A to point B? And it's through wisdom. So it's been almost 50 years.
50 years in the industry.
Yes. And 33 years of my own company, Living Tree Care, here in St. Louis. Starting in 1977, walking up to the Public Works building and having a choice of streets or forestry. Forestry just has such a beautiful ring to it, right? So I signed up for forestry. I wanted to climb trees because I saw and so there were four or five guys back from Vietnam, back from the battlefields of Vietnam. So they were hardcore guys. And I so wanted to be on the tree crew, but I had to put in my time digging holes and slinging dirt for a summer. When I finally got on the tree crew.
This is working for St. Louis, city of St. Louis?
This was for the city of Elmhurst, Illinois.
Okay.
And I wish I'd held on to my little unincorporated piece of ground.
Yeah.
I had to sell it when I moved to St. Louis and my own business to pay my taxes the first year. But as a young man, I was just so... I just got so passionate about climbing, and I had to prove myself because I was just a kid. And when I finally got to climbing the elms, I loved it so much that the older guys loved me so much because everyone bypassed the biggest elms. But I attacked those. And these elms, American elms, were so big that you had to take lunch up in a crotch. I didn't want to have to keep coming down and going up and coming down and going up.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be able to spend all day. And back then, we took every, even pencil-sized piece of deadwood off. And back then, we had to paint shiners the size of a quarter. A shiner is an open wound. That's why the pull saws used to have paintbrush holders. So
interesting.
You know, I complained about it one day, and one of the non-vets, who is one of the guys...
What, you complained about painting?
Yeah. He said, hey, Berwick, don't bitch about it. We used to have to paint shiners the size of a dime. So I go back to when we were called tree surgeons, and now we're called arborists, and it means we're supposed to know something about trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I started, and you can interject with questions.
No, why'd they give you a shot, these guys? I mean, did you just have to do a certain amount of time before they said, okay, we'll start teaching you? Who taught you? I mean, talk to us about getting up the
I was
tree for the first
17, and I was young and skinny, and I looked a lot younger than I was. And so, well, the first time I went up into a tree, someone had to rescue me because we had those old green saddles, and I was so skinny it slipped up, and I was hanging by my armpits, and so Joe Williams, who was a husky guy, shinnied up this elm and into the crotch. We used to muscle our ways up the tree.
Yeah.
We used to climb the tree. Nowadays, the young guys climb rope. So we used to shinny. That's a word that's not used anymore. And my knee, when I came down to the ground, my knees were shaking like this. It never happened before.
And this was the first time up the tree?
Yes. And so I was landlocked for another 6 months. They gave me a chance, and I blew it.
Yeah.
But when I'm glad you asked me that, because then the next time I came, I was going to prove myself. And I like I said, I started climbing the trees. The older guys were walking past. Because when we had such a wonderful forestry crew, thank God, we had $1 million budget a year. Who has that?
And what year was this?
In forestry, in the 70s.
Wow.
Who has that?
Yeah.
We had 15 full-time forestry people, and then another 30 part-timers.
Now, what is that? Do you know how much is in that budget this today in that city?
It probably still is, because my mom still has her Victorian house, and her poor tax. If my sister and husband weren't living there and helping out, and that they're going to get the house, my mom wouldn't be able to hang on to the house with the property taxes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot nowadays. I don't want to badmouth Public Works, but there's a lot of public workers just cruising in $150,000 bucket trucks that don't work like we used to.
Yeah.
We used to, on the removal crews, Dutch Elm Disease hit.
Yeah.
And there were 4 removal crews. And we used to, and I got on a removal crew. So during the winter, when the elms were dormant, and it was named Elmhurst, thousands and thousands of elms, and majestic elms, in the sun. So we pruned during dormancy, because we discovered back then that if we're pruning during growing season, the wounds give off a pheromone, a scent. It attracts vectors, especially the European elm bark beetle. And we were losing trees, so we started just trimming. And we should be doing that in line clearance across the country just during the winter on trees like oaks and elms susceptible to diseases. But back there, let's go back to the summers and the removal crews. We had a competition. Whoever took down the most trees, the most diseased elms, bought the other 3 crews shots at the end of the day in the Fire Bell pub.
Yeah, every day.
Yeah, whoever proudly cut down the most trees bought the other crew's shots. So our crew was always buying everyone shots.
Well, does that make them go, hey, I don't want to have to spend this money at the end of the day. Let's not cut.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
No.
But we were so proud and happy of it.
Yeah, like I get an opportunity to buy
To
shots.
buy you
every
guys
day.
shots because we're the best, so we're going to buy you guys shots.
So it's kind of like everybody winning. You guys won. You took down the most tree, and everybody got to have
there was
shots
no
and didn't have to pay
incentive.
them.
You know, we didn't get bonuses for that. You talked about
What kind of shots were you guys doing?
all kinds of schnapps. My mentor, my foreman was
What's his name?
John Costigan,
John
an
Costigan.
Irishman, and I learned to fear him. Back then, hard hats would be thrown at thrown. Just if a foreman got pissed off. John had a
I'm sure
temper.
that still happens sometimes.
John had a temper, and back then we had the Power Max 6, a PM6. It was
Yeah.
the first balanced saw,
Yeah.
and he had a temper, and I saw him throw a saw out of a tree more than once, just throw it and shatter on the street. And back then we had the saw cage, so John would bring back the pieces to rust. An old guy that worked in the saw cage. And I don't know how many times I saw him grab John Costigan by the beard and shake the shit out of him. and then John would grab Russ by the beard I kid you not, man. And so this kind of
Are these guys still around?
no, they're both hopefully in heaven, tree heaven.
Tree heaven.
So that was a competition we had, and I got to tell you, so since John Costigan, who was my mentor, we won most of the time. He got in trouble, and he got in trouble for taking down too many trees by the supervisor. And John would say, "But it was on the list." "Yes, but I didn't give you this. This was for tomorrow." "But I couldn't pass it up." So
Yeah.
so we really killed Dutch Elm Disease in Elmhurst.
Yeah.
And I could segue into how we were chosen by a phenomenal scientist who came up with a biological control of Dutch Elm Disease. And that's another chapter in my early tree climbing, saving.
Let's go into. I mean, you've owned your own company for the last 33 years. So, doing that, when did you start getting into your own company, coming out to St. Louis and doing that? Let's talk about those early days and where you are now and what's the future hold.
Okay, well, I'm going to just finish from Elmhurst down to here, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because we had such a good forestry crew, we were chosen to field test a biological control for Dutch Elm Disease. I'm going to make this real short. It worked. And all of a sudden, I was in charge of all the crews, the pruning crews, in just a few short years. The pruning crews, the removal crews, the injection crews. And we were chosen, Elmhurst Forestry Division and Shaker Heights, Ohio, were two field municipal crews chosen to field test this stuff. Chevron bought the rights to the stuff. The stuff worked. They were a big chemical company. I asked my
Liaison.
thank you, how to, why did they shelve it? They bought the rights from the scientists who created this. It saved trees. Why? He said back then it's not marketable. It took me years.
What do you mean it's not marketable?
It stayed alive in the trees. Now we have fungicides. You have to inject the trees every year or two. That's marketable. So this is why I asked you if I can come back on Saturday and talk a little bit more in detail. So now I'm going to come to Living Tree Care. We moved down to Missouri.
Interesting. So we're gonna put a pin in that, and we're gonna talk about that some other time here on there because that's interesting. I want to hear more in that, and it's just, it goes to our health of our bodies. There's things that they have the cure, but it's not marketable. They don't get paid for them year after year, and it would take away their business.
I went all the way to the mountains of Bozeman, Montana, and met the scientist who created this. His story's phenomenal. So anyway.
Okay, we're going to put a pin in that, guys. We'll maybe have another podcast again here soon with Phil to dive in a little bit more because there's I hear the passion rolling out from you, and I hear some of the anger and frustrations and questioning, and
right.
So this might be a good one to go back on.
Thanks.
So yeah, let's go to your company.
So in '88, I moved. I got burned out doing trees, so I moved down to go into full-time ministry. I got Jesus. One day I was looking at an American elm, and it's like, hey, I still like an occasional brew, but I was really doing too much partying and not doing what I should have been doing. God spoke to me when I was looking at an elm. He said, someday you need to be saving men and not trees. So I didn't hear that. The shit hit the fan a year later. I got down on my knees, asked Jesus to come in, and all of a sudden I felt this calling. Came down to Missouri. A buddy dragged me down to a family camp. I really didn't want to go, but I fell in love with Missouri, with the nature down here, with the country down here. Went to seminary for 3 years. God called me back into trees. I was like, I thought I was done with that. So hence 33 years later till now, I'm still doing trees, and I'm climbing trees, and we train municipalities. Most of my guys who I train now have their own gigs, or they're working at the top of line clearance companies in the area. So I'm downsized, and I was obedient. Yeah, I went to the calling. That's my anointing, if you want, or whatever you want to call it. My talent to this day. And we said, okay, God, if I'm really supposed to do this. I mean, I purposely gave my pickup truck to a buddy. Like, hello, I came down here in a van.
To St. Louis.
Yeah. He called me back up while I was on my third year of seminary, and my wife's, I'm burned out. My wife's burned out because I'm climbing for some hard guy tree boss during the day, going to seminary at night.
Yeah.
And I could tell my wife was suffering, so I left seminary. And that's when I got through a supernatural event. I knew that God was telling me to go back into trees down here. And I said, okay, if you're telling me this, what's the name for the company? And my wife got the name Living Tree in a Dream.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So in a Bible, on his way to Calvary, months later, we saw that he said he was talking with the widows who were weeping over him. He said, if they do this in the green tree, think that what they'll do in the dry. In the Catholic Bible, it says, Jesus said, if they do this in the living tree, think what they'll do in the dry. Weep for yourselves, daughters of Jerusalem. If they did this in the living tree, think what they'll do in the dry. So it was a hard word for these gals that were weeping over him, but he was suffering at the time, pretty messed up. So we did that, and we've done some really fun stuff, like lightning installation in the 150-year-old heritage trees of Forest Park, using different injection systems and saving trees. And I can pridefully say that just Living Tree Care and one other company, as far as I know, in the whole region, would only take down a tree if a client had a good reason.
If they had a good reason. That's good.
Yeah. And people would say, well, how do you stay in business? And I was always interested. I would quantify where do our leads come from?
Yeah.
How many in Yellow Pages, how many in word of mouth, how many in the local newspaper, so and so. And I would ask my secretary this. But I personally, if I lost a bid, I would be interested in, if you don't mind, sir.
Yeah, why?
How can I sharpen my pencil? Who was a competitor that beat me? And they didn't have a problem telling me. But if it was a removal, most of the time they wouldn't remember who they hired to cut down their tree. I kid you not. Hey, Sarah, what was that tree guy's name that cut down our tree? And so that told me a lot.
Yeah.
It told me a lot that I don't want the guys with the chainsaws to make a living cutting down the trees. I don't want to downgrade that that segment of the industry.
Yeah.
But as far as I was concerned, if they couldn't remember the name of a removal company, and not only that, but the tree's gone, there's not work to come back to unless they plant another tree. And as you, I'm sure, have talked to nurserymen and women, this generation doesn't plant trees like the older generation, right? So invariably, 9 out of 10 times, that tree that someone thinks has to come down really doesn't have to come down. You mean you... Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, this is a massive spruce, Mrs. Jones. Everyone on your block enjoys this tree, but it's blocking my house. Well, it's so big now that I can raise the crown, and raising the crown means we take off the lower branches. Oh, you can do it, and the job's done. And she's like, "This is beautiful, thank you."
Yeah.
And, I'm telling you, 9 out of 10 times, that tree did not. Now, by the same token, you and I know a tree can look really good, and it's ready to keel over. This is why the root zone, checking of the root zone and tree hazard, protocols are so important. So if someone didn't have a final, if I was losing an argument and I really knew it was going to take away from air, trees are the air we breathe, and they purify the air. We know this. It's irreplaceable, and I'm convinced that that tree would be a loss to the neighborhood.
Yeah. You don't remove them.
And it's not a liability.
And it's something, too, that it separates you from everybody else out there, and...
I just want to finish this one thing. The one thing, if I tell them the truth, that this tree will add 4 or 5 or 6,000 to your property value, the guy that doesn't want to rake his leaves, or he's taking his tree down because it's dripping sap on his motorhome, he'll really think about keeping the tree then.
Yeah.
Because the dollar talks.
So where's your company at now, and how does somebody get a hold of you if they have some questions?
We're here in St. Louis, town north St. Louis called Ferguson, which is infamous during the Ferguson uprisings. It was really one of the most inclusive towns in the nation, with blacks and whites holding hands, marrying each other. But God put his finger on Ferguson, and all hell broke loose during the shooting of Michael Brown.
Mm-hmm.
So your listeners will recognize the name Ferguson, and that's where my home is now. We moved out of the country. God called us to be peacemakers in Ferguson, and so that's a whole story because I'm an artist also. And, St. Louis, St. Charles, Jefferson County.
And how do they get a hold of you?
I got a simple website called livingtreecare.com.
Good. And then Instagram too?
I need to get a Living Tree Care Instagram, but right now it's my name, Wendell Phillips Berwick. Phil, you call me Phil, and all my life I've been called Phil. But when I moved to Ferguson, I started using Wendell Phillips because Wendell Phillips was an abolitionist, and I'm Wendell Phillips Berwick III, so I'm proud of my northern Indiana heritage. Wendell Phillips was an abolitionist, and after the Civil War, he fought for Indian rights and women's rights. So as a kid growing up, I wasn't called Wendell, but now as an old tree guy.
Wendell, it fits.
Wendell.
I like it.
So,
all right, before we end this show, is there any little tips from the top or some wisdom that you can just share to the listeners right now? Something you learned over your 50 years of being in this industry, the ups, the downs, the changes that you've seen over time.
I'm realizing now I could write a book. What comes to me, one of my salesmen, when we were really in the thick of it, doing great, I told Dan, I said, tell him this or tell him, I was making an excuse why we were asking if we could shift the appointment, either another day or another hour. And I would say let your employees confront you if you're a boss. Allow them to confront you. Hear what they have to say. He said, you know what, Phil? People don't like excuses.
No, they don't.
We might think that it sounds good to us. We're the only ones it sounds good to. There's a lot more, but I'll just...
No, that's
a big
good.
one right now.
That's good, guys. People don't like excuses. It just sounds good to you. It doesn't sound good to everybody else. I hate them. Well, Phil, listen, I appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks a
You
lot.
got a book to tell. You know, we got a lot more conversations we're going to have, and I'm interested in hearing about what you were talking about, the Dutch elm. I mean,
Dutch
the
Elm
elms
Disease.
and,
Yeah.
you know, what happened
We
there.
can even talk about emerald ash borer to this.
Yeah. That's interesting to dive in and figure out and hear your input and some of the things you have. But, you know, everybody listen. I appreciate you guys listening, of course. You know the fee, and the fee is share the show. So if you listen to it and you went all the way to the end, make sure you share it. And lastly, I always leave with you guys is to continue to elevate the standard of our industry through safety, training, and innovation. Till next time, we'll see you guys. Bye.